Over the last several days, there have been some alarming reports from the USS Abraham Lincoln. That ship has been at sea since November. Its deployment extended for more than 260 days. It's been part of the force in the Middle East with the war in Iran. Some of the reports coming out that there have been some mental health incidents. A number of sailors have tried to actually jump overboard during the deployment. Also, reports of deteriorating conditions aboard the ship. Joining us on Metro News Talkline this morning is retired U.S. Navy Rear Admiral Michael Smith. Michael, good morning. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning. Glad to be back.
How long is a typical deployment at sea for an aircraft carrier?
You know, a standard deployment is 6 months. For example, the Abraham Lincoln deployed in November. The previous December, they just got back from a 5-month deployment. That's a pretty quick turnaround, but generally it's about 6 months. But we have seen during high periods of combat operations during Iraq and Afghanistan, you could get up to 9 to 10 months. It's very, very hard. It's very strenuous, but it's not unheard of when you're in the middle of a crisis like we are now.
What kind of challenges does an aircraft carrier start to face out of the norm if it goes past that typical time frame?
Well, the biggest problem truly is the uncertainty. Not because normally what happens, you have a clear start date, a clear end date of that 6-month deployment. But when crises happen, and now you're extended another month, or you're extended 2 months, or probably in the Abraham Lincoln's case, you're just told you're extended until they can get the next carrier out there. And so there's stress on the crew that the command has to handle because they just don't know when it's all going to end. And that's probably the biggest challenge the command has. You know, this particular deployment was very, very unique. We have had an extensive supply capability in the Middle East for years, all centered on Bahrain. But when suddenly Iran closed the strait and the Abraham Lincoln was outside the Gulf and Bahrain's inside the Gulf, you know, from the very beginning, they've had huge supply challenges. It's taken a long time to overcome them. They have, but you know, in the beginning of their cruise, you saw reports of them, you know, running out of fresh fruit and vegetables just because their normal way of getting goods to the ship was ended. So they've had challenges their entire deployment, and then add now to this the unknown they've been going through. And when are we actually going to get home? And all of the stresses they're having related to their families back home who really thought they'd be home, and they have all the challenges. And when are you going to be here, buddy? You know, when are you going to be home and help the family? So all of those contribute to really morale issues that we've always seen on these ships, let alone long-term problems. So this ship's going to be gone much longer than possible. So when it goes back, it has to have an extended availability to repair everything, which just makes the cycle worse because now another ship has to deploy. So there's all sorts of issues that come with extending a deployment of a ship unexpectedly.
Retired U.S. Navy Rear Admiral Michael Smith joining us here on Metro News Talkline. A lot of this sounds shocking to everyday average citizens who have never served in the military, but as a Navy guy, is this shocking? Are these reports alarming?
They are alarming. Really, what's most alarming is the chain of command's response. You know, allegedly, a few weeks ago, they had this town hall, and there were family members specifically addressing senior Navy leadership about the reports they're hearing from their family members, from their spouses, from their sons. And there was a lot of concern that was voiced. What I don't get is how tone deaf the response was. You know, if they're having a mental health crisis, even if they might be, why don't you just immediately address it? You know, so I think what's alarming to me has been the lack of empathy and the lack of leadership that's been presented from the top down. I mean, the president asked about it, says, well, they haven't deployed long enough, or the Secretary of Defense just dismissing it, or the acting Secretary of Navy blaming the media. Why don't you just say, okay, you know what? These are amazing sailors. They're doing their very best. They've been in combat for 250 days between ports. Look, we think they're a great crew, but just to make sure, we're going to send out the very best team of mental health experts the military has. How hard is that? Instead, everybody dismisses it. And that's what's most shocking to me.
So why didn't they do that? I guess it turns to the why. Is that somehow considered admitting failure or showing weakness? Why? I don't understand. You paint a really good picture there and something that seems easy to do. Why not do it?
You know, obviously, I don't really know the reason. That if you take a look at the response to alleged problems that may have been caused by the administration, they often just deny it. I just think this is different. This is our military. These are people who are executing brilliantly the war that they have put on the shoulders of these sailors. I don't know why they won't admit it. Admiral Cooper finally went out there a little bit late, I would say. And then his report is this is a great crew. Of course, it's a great crew. That's the whole point. This is a great crew that's working their butts off. They're doing everything they can to be the best out there as it gets extended and extended and extended. That is the mental health crisis. Of course, you're doing a great job, but there's a cost to it. Why didn't Admiral Cooper bring out that team with him or go a week earlier? If you really cared. So I think that there's just a reaction from that I'm seeing from this chain of command to deny, 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 and then everything will be fine. And I think when it comes to the mental health of our sailors, that is irresponsible.
Talking with retired U.S. Navy Rear Admiral Michael Smith, joining us here on Metro News Talkline. Give us an idea, for those of us who obviously have never served on an aircraft carrier or a ship at sea during a conflict, what kind of stresses are sailors under on an everyday basis, and how do you deal with that on an everyday basis?
So I've served on ships in the Gulf. I was on a ship in Desert Storm in the first Iraq War, and we operated in the middle of a minefield the whole time. And so there were mines drifting by us. The ship had to maneuver not to hit a mine constantly. And I've served on the Nimitz going into the Gulf during the second Iraq War. The stresses on the crew that's doing their job is, from a perspective of always needing to make sure that they're ready, and it's not just the aircraft carrier, it's those ships that are protecting the aircraft carrier. They're under constant threat. Is Iran going to try and send a missile at the aircraft carrier? They would love to do that. Everyone knows they would love to do that. So you're under this constant stress, if your job is to defend the aircraft carrier, of ensuring you are 100% perfect every second of the day. If you're not in that responsible role, in the back of your mind, as you're doing whatever your job is to support the ship, that you may get struck at a certain time. There's nothing you can do about it, but it's a level of stress that's always there. I remember I didn't really even recognize I was a junior officer when I was on that ship in the minefields, and it wasn't really until the Desert Storm was over and I'm leaving the Gulf that suddenly that pressure goes away. I didn't even recognize it was there. So, that suddenly you realize, all right, I'm not going to hit a mine in the middle of the night. So similarly, those guys are on all of those ships, those sailors are all under that same stress all the time. Let alone, hey, the guys that got to fly the aircraft carriers, the aircraft, the ones that are responsible for targeting. You get one thing wrong in targeting, and we see what happens. We see what the response is. So they feel that responsibility every day. So there is stress upon stress upon stress. It's manageable normally. We train to that. These people have done it their whole careers. So we're not asking them to do the impossible, but we should at least recognize that what we're asking them to do is unique. They are in the middle of a war that was not planned, and they are executing flawlessly. yes, there might be some stress, and why not make sure they're all okay? Uh, that's what I would say.
I was reading a while back a book, and it talked a bit. One of the themes, it went back to D-Day, and it was talking about the attitude of General Montgomery in his conversations with Eisenhower and the various delays that they had experienced because of weather. And, D-Day got bumped a couple of times in different ways. And I don't remember the exact quote, but it was akin to from Monty to Ike, the men will go stark raving mad. They needed to be able to act and know what they were going to do. You could only put up with that level of stress for so long. Given how this has happened in the Strait and what is going through with Iran, and we haven't, some would argue, fully went through with things to end this. It's kind of at a situation of a wait and see. Do you think that plays into what these sailors are feeling? The idea that they're there, why are we still waiting around? Let's get this over with, and regardless of the result, it will have happened and we can move on.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I can't imagine being on that ship. And again, you don't know when you're leaving. That's one thing, but you don't know when the combat you're doing is going to be over. And the only messages you've got is what your commander in chief's saying each day. So you do successful strikes. You've blockaded the Iranian ports, and suddenly it looks like there's going to be a deal. And maybe you're like, wow, this is good. We've succeeded in what we needed to do, and now it looks like it's all going to be done. And then the next day, the president says, no, I don't like what they just did. We're going to go back and do this again. And that constant cycling, the unknown of, all right, when is this going to be over? You know, I hold very, very little respect for Montgomery, having studied that myself. Eisenhower was a much better leader at caring for his people and understanding the damages. And you just don't go no matter what the weather is going to be. So I'm more on the side of Eisenhower but they knew what their mission was. It was land on the beaches, get a beachhead, destroy the Nazis. Everybody was behind that. The why they are there changes every day, and now they're trying to communicate home to their families. At a certain point, they just have to stop listening to that. They just have to execute their mission, which they are doing great. But they all want to know when's it going to be over. They don't even know why they're there. That changes all the time. So, and all of that really adds to that stress. It's not a clear-cut mission. And when I did Desert Storm, it was easy. Go in, kick Saddam out of Kuwait. We went home to parades. This is completely different. Well, and that impacts them on a daily basis because they know they're doing a great job. They're fulfilling the demands of the seniors above them. But why are they there? If they have to talk to their families, which some of these families have reported in some of these articles, they don't know why they're there. And it just unnecessarily adds to the stress. There's nothing you do about it as far as what's certain. Go and make sure it's not impacting their own mental health.
Retired U.S. Navy Rear Admiral Michael Smith. Always appreciate the perspective. Thank you so much this morning.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.